I have a story to tell. I know everyone has their stories, but some are more serious than others. Some people don't like to share their stories. I've learned that over the years. I find the sadder a person's story is, the less likely they're going to share it. And I understand that. I have a sad story myself, and it took many, many years until I was comfortable telling it. It wasn't until I was talking with my first grandchild that I actually opened up about my story, the one that could have broken me but didn't. I was of Jewish descent, and I'd grown up in Poland. When I was a young boy of only 8 years old, my family and I were rounded up and sent to a concentration camp. Hitler had just invaded Poland, and the war had begun. The first big plan was to rid Europe of our kind and basically anybody who wasn't a purebred German. I'll never forget the look on my parents' faces when we heard that knock on the door. It was an aggressive knock, the kind that said, "We're only knocking to be courteous, but we can storm in at any time we choose." When the guards came in, they asked to see our identification papers. We all had to wear stars on our arms to show that we were Jewish, but I didn't mind. I had no idea then, though, what it all meant. We were told we were being rounded up with our friends and neighbors and sent to a work camp to help with the war effort. My parents knew better, though. They had heard the rumors and had kept as much of it from me as possible. We were shoved onto a train that was so crowded you could barely breathe. We were lucky to end up near a little cutout in the train so we could feel some fresh air rushing in as the train sped through the countryside. My mom held me close, like it was going to be the last time she could. She cried, and my dad tried his best to comfort her. She whispered things into my ear like, "No matter what, once we're at the camp, you do what they say, and if they ever try to load you onto a truck or put you with a big group and take you somewhere, you hide. Promise me you'll run and hide." I agreed, but I still didn't quite get what she was so worried about. When we got to the camp, we had been traveling for days. Lots of people were sick. Many of the youngest and oldest passengers had actually died on the journey. When the train car door opened, the people started pouring out, desperate to breathe fresh air. We were immediately separated, women on one side, men on the other, and children in a completely separate group. My mom called to me to remember what I had promised her, and I said, through my tears, that I remembered. That was the last time I saw my mom or my dad. And by the time I figured out what had happened to them, I was no longer an innocent 8-year-old. I was wise to what was happening and why, and I was determined to survive. That was the best thing I could do to honor my parents. Us kids fell into a routine at the camp. The guards liked to use us for cleaning weapons and things like that because our fingers were small and could reach into small gun parts. We could clean for hours. We were fed meager portions, but we seemed to be surviving all right. I'd made 2 particularly close friends, Sasha and Finn. They were both the same age as me, and they hadn't seen their parents since they arrived either. Despite the hard times and missing our parents, we did have some good times together. We found an old ball wedged under a shed, and we'd ask the guards if we could play with it. One guard was nicer than the others, and he said he'd love to see a soccer game. So we were divided into 2 big groups, and we played soccer every day. The guards started placing bets, and it became a form of entertainment for both the guards and us. Mostly it just helped us pass the time. Rumors started to spread that the children were going to be rounded up and sent elsewhere. I remembered my mother's words, and I talked to Sasha and Finn about how we should do everything and anything we could to not end up on that transport. We started looking around the camp for good hiding spots, but it was pretty open. There were some spots where the bunkers were raised above the ground where we could squeeze under, but we felt like that'd be the first place the guards would look for missing prisoners. We thought we had lots of time, but a mere few mornings later it seemed like things were happening. We could hear a lot of movement and shouts coming from outside, so we peeked out of our bunker to see all the children being lined up. They seemed to be organized by age, with the youngest at the end, the oldest at the opposite. We heard a guard approaching our cabin, and we were relieved when the nice one poked his head inside and saw us. He whispered as quickly and quietly as he could, "You don't want to be on that truck," and then disappeared back outside. We knew what that meant, and we started to brainstorm where could we possibly hide. The answer came to me, suddenly. The latrines. You could barely call them toilets, but the latrine consisted of a shed with a bench with holes cut out and the slough underneath that everything dropped into. There was a hole behind the shed, through which the latrine was drained from time to time, and the hole was big enough for us to crawl into, and while it did mean us hiding under the latrines, we felt confident no guard would want to be poking around in there to look for anybody. And we kept our eyes peeled on what was happening outside through a hole in the wall. We decided that we'd wait until the head guard was out of sight. We called him Eagle Eyes, as he didn't seem to miss a thing. We could hear trucks pulling up and children being loaded onto them. Now was our chance. Everyone was distracted getting the kids onto the trucks, and the head guard didn't seem to be around. We slipped out of the back of the bunker and as quietly as we could made our way to the opposite end of camp where the latrines were. Luckily, the shed had 4 holes for 4 toilets, so there was one for each of us to shimmy into. The smell was horrendous, of course, but we were able to squeeze ourselves down the hole alongside the hose that extended all the way down into the slough beneath. Each of us forced ourselves to go as far down as we could, but the closer we got to the slough, the harder it was to keep from gagging or throwing up. We could hear guards approaching and stayed as still and quiet as we could. We could hear them searching the bunkers, banging on walls and flipping over beds. They were calling out that anybody hiding would be smart to come out now before punishments were handed out. I remember my mom's words on the train that day, and I kept still. I told myself to breathe through my mouth, but I could also taste the smell, which was almost worse than smelling the smell. We heard the sounds of the trucks driving away, and then mainly silence. All the kids hadn't been rounded up and sent away. We could still hear lots of voices and activities going on. We hadn't discussed how long we should stay hiding for. After a couple of hours, when we were sure the guards were no longer poking around, I called out to Sasha and Finn. I asked how much longer they thought we should stay there, and Finn said until nightfall. That way we were unlikely to be spotted when we were crawling out. As awful as that prospect was, we all agreed. We also said we shouldn't talk in case somebody overheard us, so we went back to silence. Several people had come to use the toilets, although not the guards. They had separate toilets from the prisoners. No one discovered us, and we managed to stay completely quiet until nightfall. Once the sun went down and the cold started to settle in, I called to the boys that it was time for us to sneak out. I said I'd go first so that I could make sure that it was safe for the others to come out. I quietly started to move. I couldn't believe how sore my body was. It was as if my legs and arms had fallen asleep, and now they were waking up slowly and painfully. I was all pins and needles, but told my legs and arms what to do, and they listened. I pulled myself to the top of the hole and was never happier to see blue sky. I lifted my head just so my eyes were above the line and could quickly scan the area. I didn't see anyone, and as anxious as I was to get out of there, I forced myself to pause and listen to make sure I couldn't hear any footsteps either. When I was sure it was safe, I pulled myself out. I quickly crawled to a tree nearby and hid behind its trunk. I was close enough to be able to see the latrines and talk to the boys, but was concealed by the tree. I waited for a couple of minutes, and then I told Sasha it was safe to come out. He did the same thing, and he rushed to my side. Next, we told Finn that it was his turn, and he did the same thing. We'd made it. We sat under that tree and enjoyed breathing the fresh air for a few minutes before we decided the best thing to do would be to slip into one of the crowded bunkers so we wouldn't be noticed. We stayed close to the tree line for concealment, and we slipped into the closest and loudest bunker. We explained to the other prisoners where we had been, and we got a lot of "we can smell where you've been" comments. We all talked and speculated about where the kids on the trucks would end up, but we didn't really want to think about it. We were just happy to have avoided the roundup. I silently looked upwards and whispered, "Mom, wherever you are, I kept my promise." and I promise I'll fight every single time and hide every single time." A tear slid down my cheek as the thought of never seeing my parents again hit me like a hammer. I wanted so badly to tell them what had just happened, but I didn't know where they were or even if they were still alive. This was the story I told my grandson that day. I told him how I'd survived a war and hatred like no one should ever have to. It was hard to talk about, but I felt like that just made it more important to share. I'm an old man now, but I'll tell you one thing. I'll never forget the desperate whisper of my mother telling me to hide, and I'll never forget the smell of that hiding spot, and I'll never stop being grateful for surviving. Sasha and Finn survived right alongside me. When the camp was liberated and the war was over, me and my two friends went on to live our lives together and honor all the friends and family that we had lost along the way. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments section what you thought about this story.